Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I've always loved the outdoors. As a kid, my dad would take me hiking and camping in the mountains near our little town. Those trips ignited my passion for nature and adventure. As an adult, I dreamed of one day owning a piece of wooded land where I could build my own private campsite and recapture those memories with my own kids. Well, last year that dream finally came true. I was able to purchase 10 acres of vacant land about an hour outside the city. The property was heavily forested with a stream running through it. It was perfect. My plan was to clear a small area near the stream to set up a tent site and fire pit. I envisioned cozy weekends spent camping under the stars with my family. The first time I visited the property after closing, I walked the perimeter to familiarize myself with the terrain. That's when I noticed something odd. There was already a campsite set up near the stream. A large tent was pitched alongside a roaring fire. Coolers, camping chairs, and other gear were scattered about. Someone had literally built their own campground on my vacant land. I called out but got no reply. Whoever had set up camp was clearly not there at the moment. I felt that anger simmering inside as I looked over their unauthorized campsite. I considered taking down their tent and removing all their stuff, but I didn't want to touch anything and risk them accusing me of theft or destruction of property. So in that moment, I decided to let it be. But I was definitely going to get to the bottom of this. Over the next week, I kept close watch on the property from a distance. I wanted to see if anyone showed up at the illegal campsite. Sure enough, an SUV rolled up one Saturday morning. A middle-aged woman got out and headed straight for the tent and fire pit like she owned the place. It was time for answers. I walked over calmly and introduced myself. I explained to her that this was my private property and the campsite she built was not permitted. Her response? She laughed in my face. Then she told me this land belonged to her and I was the one trespassing on her property. I was flabbergasted. She flat out refused to take down her campsite and claimed she had every right to be there. That's when I realized this was no ordinary woman. This was a bona fide Karen in the wild. I remained composed and once again asserted my legal ownership of the land, complete with documentation. I asked her politely to take her tent and belongings and leave immediately. Karen got in my face and told me to get lost. She said she discovered this abandoned land months ago before I came along and had already filed documents to claim ownership. She boasted that everything from the creek to the tree line now belonged to her. My blood was boiling, but I knew losing my cool would only make the situation worse. I told Karen I would be in touch and headed back to my truck. As I sat there contemplating my next move, I noticed Karen pulling out a cell phone. A few minutes later, a police cruiser came rolling down the dirt road towards the campsite. Unbelievable. She had actually called the cops on me. The officer approached me first. I calmly explained that I had documentation proving the land was legally mine. I offered to show my paperwork, but the officer said that wouldn't be necessary. He walked over to Karen, who proceeded to act like a victim, claiming I was harassing her and trying to vandalize her campsite. Thankfully, the officer saw through her act pretty quickly. He requested both our IDs. When my name matched the record of ownership, and Karen could produce no proof of purchase for the property, the officer told her she'd have to pack up her things and go. Karen argued and protested dramatically, insisting she would file a lawsuit against me. The officer made it clear she didn't have a legal leg to stand on. He supervised while Karen angrily took down her unauthorized campsite. As she packed up her car, Karen shouted threats that this wasn't over. I had a feeling she might try something again, so I told the officer I would be installing cameras on the property just in case. He agreed that was a smart idea given the circumstances. I wasted no time setting up wildlife cameras strategically around the property. They would record video anytime motion was detected. A few weeks went by without incident. Then one evening, my phone alerted me to movement on the west end of the land. I pulled up the live camera feed and sure enough, there was Karen trespassing again. This time she was trying to build a little shack from some old boards and tin sheets. Unbelievable. I immediately called the police and drove to the property to confront her again. By the time I arrived, Karen had assembled the beginnings of her makeshift shack. The officer pulled up shortly after me. I showed him the video footage proving she was once again trespassing and attempting to illegally occupy my land. Karen played innocent, saying she was just taking materials left on her property to build a shelter. The officer didn't buy her act this time. Since she had been previously warned to stay off my land, he arrested Karen on the spot. She kicked and screamed, insisting I was the criminal. But finally, handcuffs were slapped on her wrists. Karen ended up being charged with criminal trespass and unlawful occupation of property. She paid a hefty fine that taught her an expensive lesson. I also filed for a restraining order which legally prohibited her from stepping foot on my land again. She still insists that one day she'll get her land back from me. But for now, the only camping trips Karen will be taking are to her living room. As for me, I finally got to build the peaceful campsite I had envisioned from the start. Now my kids and I enjoy cozy weekends together at our special spot by the stream. We toast marshmallows and gaze at the stars, creating our very own camping traditions far away from any Karens. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This slow burn started a full year and a half before my plan came into effect. Earlier in the year, my dad quite sensibly suggested that, with the size of our family Christmas party, we skip a generation with gifts to ease the financial strain as the extended family grew. At the time, I was struggling with my business and athletic career, and my wife, then GF, was working on her second master's degree, so I suggested names from a hat, but he wanted to spoil all his grandchildren. I said fair enough. I'll chip in for Oma's cruise and buy gifts for my step-siblings, but don't expect anything grand. Dramatis personae for that Christmas party, me, 28-year-old, at the time, heavyweight mixed martial artist and strength coach, aka a small-time athlete working a day job to barely make rent, in addition to training full-time. Martha, stepsister, 40-ish, an aging mommy whose only assets are starting to sag too much for them to be assets anymore, leaving her with no other definable personality traits. Jane, my oldest niece, 12, stepsister's daughter. Imagine the most vapid teenager stereotype you can and multiply it by 1,000. Tim, my oldest nephew, 9, stepsister's son, living proof that you're never too young to be an a-hole. Robert, stepbrother, 36, formerly cool dude who gave up on life when his kids were born, years later would gain back enough willpower and gumption to physically assault his wife. Tammy, 6 bro's daughter, sweet and shy girl terrified by my mere presence, the wisest of the bunch, i.e. M-ho. Bubba, 7 bro's son, a generally nice kid who at this time was partway into evolving into an a-hole after being constantly told to look up to and emulate Thing 2. Tammy has brought a Nintendo DS, and all the kids are struggling to play it together, so I foolishly offer to loan them mine to lighten the load. Tammy agrees to share with Jane, and Bubba agrees to share with Tim. Having stupidly deprived myself of my means to escape social obligations, I go to the living room to acquire that much older cure for not wanting to deal with other people: alcohol. Not even having had time to pour a dram, my trained ear picks up from the kids' room the unmistakable sound of one human being pummeling another. I politely suggest to Robert that he might want to go have a look, but bro hasn't given 2 craps about anything in about 7 years, so he waves it off. And I go to investigate. I walk in to see that Tim may be an a-hole, but is not untalented, and is managing to strike, shove into a wall, and kick Bubba all at the same time, while attempting to play my DS with his other hand. Having decided his turn began the moment I left the room. Jane has simply wrested the DS from Tammy, who is now sitting in the corner crying. I shout for Martha, informing her that if she doesn't get in here to break things up before I count to 10, I would have a stern conversation with them. She turns up and separates the kids, and I retrieve my DS. Instead of giving Tim a lesson on sharing and not hitting people, she proceeds to berate Bubba, the kid who was beaten, for not simply giving up the DS to her little piece of crap and making her son look bad. Jane simply lets out a tween-age sigh for the ages and tosses the other DS into the crying Tammy. I then excuse myself from the party, thanking whatever gods may be that I don't have to provide gifts for any of those little craps. 6 months later, my firm belief in atheism is confirmed as bro calls me, and this conversation ensues. Robert, hey, elbow smash, while I really appreciated the gifts last year, you should really get something for the kids this year instead. Christmas is all about the children after all. Me? No, I turn up to chat with you and Dad and Oma. I really don't give 2 craps about the kids. Robert, that's a mean thing to say about my kids. Don't you care about them? Me? You cared about them so much that at the last party you couldn't be bothered to break up a fight where your son was being beaten bloody. Robert, Tim is a good kid. Martha said he just had a bad day. Me, he was literally beating your child. You didn't put pics on social media for a week because of the bruises. If Tim were an adult and had that kind of bad day, I'd have had a stern conversation with him and convinced him peacefully to lay on the floor until the police arrived. Robert, well, Stepsis and I were talking, and we think you should buy stuff for the kids next year instead of us. Me? Well, I'm happy not to buy you anything, but I'm not getting crap for Martha's little craps, especially when she encourages that behavior. Robert, well, if you aren't going to get something for all the kids, you shouldn't get anything at all. It's not right if you don't treat them equally. Me? Done. Now, I'm sure they wish it had been this simple, but unfortunately it wasn't, and I certainly wouldn't have written such a long-winded story if that were the payoff. Thanks for bearing with me so far. We're almost at the end. A few months later, about 2 weeks before Christmas, I get an email from my dad with links to various toys, mostly from Toys R Us, which still existed at the time. When I call him back to ask what that's all about, this conversation ensues. Me: Hey, what's up? I got your email. What's that all about? Dad: Those are gifts for the kids for Christmas. Me: That's cool if you're getting them that. I'll see them when the kids open them. Dad: No, that's for you to get them. Me: I don't buy for that generation, remember? And I already sent you my contribution to Oma's cruise. Dad: You need to get stuff for the kids. Don't you want them to look up to you as an uncle? Me: Not really. Also, what part of my life suggests to you that they ought to look up to me as any sort of role model? You'd be better off telling them to grow up to be rock stars. Dad: Not the point. Christmas is about the children. If you don't get them this stuff, I won't put your name on the card for Oma. Me: That's a crappy thing to do, considering I already paid into that. Dad: Will you get the stuff or not? Me: Well, I guess my name isn't going on the card then. This will cost me more than a month's rent, so you can take this list and grease it up real nice. Dad, interrupting: Calm your jets. This is what they want. Me: I'll get them a token something, but I'm not taking out a loan. Dad: Fine, just make it something they enjoy. Me: If what I get doesn't put a giant smile on each and every one of their faces, I'll buy you dinner at a steakhouse of your choosing. Dad: That's the spirit. Talk to you later. So, Christmas rolls around, and my wife and I have bought not just one, but 4 gifts for each of the little ones and wrapped them all beautifully. My dad, correctly, assumes it's all probably from the dollar store, but it's nicely wrapped, and he gives me a look of approval as I place it under the tree. My wife and I schmooze for a bit, and then suggest that since we brought several gifts for each of the kids, why don't they open one each before dinner so they have something to do while they wait? Their parents, of course, agree, as it gives them more of a reason to ignore their kids and talk about them instead, so they send us off to hand out gifts to their kids. Martha is looking especially smug. As they begin to unwrap them, I prepare the camera as my wife goes for our coats, and I stick around just long enough to immortalize on film the big crap-eating grin on each of the kids' faces as they see what their gift is. Less than 1 minute later, the first blast from the air horn, Tim's gift, can be heard in the hallway, clearly by my wife and me as we make our way to the elevator. I have no idea how much of the bulk pack of silly string, Tammy's gift, or the 36 rainbow pack of off-brand Sharpies, Bubba's gift, ended up on the walls, but I do know they repainted the place the next month. Whether or not the pile of slap-on bracelets we got for Jane ended up on the wrists and legs of the parents as they tried to contain the other 3 will be left to the imagination, but I like to think they all ended up in the height of 80s fashion before Boxing Day. I may never know if they opened the rest of their presents. Everyone got a copy of each of the other's gifts, you know, for fairness, plus a bunch of gross and mildly inappropriate temporary tattoos. In the confusion, none of them noticed either me or my wife leaving. I'm certain at some point they did notice the pretty gold envelope addressed to the parents on the tree. Inside was a very pretty card, blank but for the following note. This was a warning shot from off the top of my head. I've got a whole year to get creative for next time. Merry Christmas-y. I never bought anyone steak dinner. However, I enjoyed several more Christmases with my Oma and Dad until they passed, and I stopped seeing that side of the family at all. No mention of this incident or gifts for the kids was ever made again. The next one is a petty revenge story. So yesterday I was returning home with a heavy bag of groceries. As I approached my apartment building, I saw a delivery man with a parcel trolley waiting at the door. I decided to open it for him so he could get in while I checked my mailbox. As I entered the building, I heard him get on the elevator. He must have heard me enter the building as well, but he didn't bother to hold the lift for me. No big deal. I'll just wait for it to come back down. The elevator stopped on the 4th floor, and I noticed it stayed at the 4th floor for a lot longer than it normally should, almost like it was stuck. After a moment, it started moving, except instead of going down to me, it was going up and stopped at the 5th floor. Again, it was stopping for an unusually long time. It was at this point I realized the courier must have been holding up the elevator doors with his trolley, so they couldn't close, meaning the elevator wouldn't move on. Annoyed because I have a heavy bag of shopping, I live on the 7th floor, and we only have one elevator. I was even more incensed when I saw the elevator carry on going further up and holding at other floors. At this point, I'd been waiting a good couple of minutes, so I decided to take the stairs to the 7th floor. However, I ran as fast as I could. Why? Because the elevator was coming down from the 16th floor, and on my way to the 7th floor, I pressed for the elevator on each floor I passed. If he enjoyed holding up the lift, he could spend extra time in them on the way down. I waited in the stairwell and listened to the elevator stop on my floor, doors open, doors close, stop on the 6th, and so on. When it hit the 5th, I could just about hear the courier say, "For duck's sake," as he realized no one is getting on the elevator. I was out of breath and had a good sweat going on, but it was worth it in the name of pettiness. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I am in the midst of leaving a truly terrible job. I have only been there for a year, but began noticing issues after the first month. Now, this is in healthcare, and we work with very vulnerable people. I have seen some horrendous ethical issues and a lack of competency among employees and my employer. For example, permitting clinicians to perform tasks they are not trained in, recommending treatments that are basically pseudoscience. Not to mention, my employer has no respect for boundaries or work-life balance, which are essential in this field if you want to avoid burnout. They have horrible work-life balance, time management, and organizational skills themselves, leading them to be behind on all work constantly, with over 2,000 emails sitting in their inbox. This has also resulted in much of my work being delayed, and clients getting upset that they are waiting for things that the employer needs to do. Because of this incompetence, I get constant emails and texts asking me to work on off days, or my employer texting at 8 p.m. or 7 a.m. and expecting a reply. I have set very clear boundaries from the start that I don't work outside my hours, and have also raised concerns about the ethics/competency issues, which resulted in my employer becoming defensive and emotional and changing nothing. Since giving my notice, the employer has been pushing boundaries even more. So, being the compliant human that I am, and because I do need to wrap up things that I have been waiting for my employer to get to for months, I began responding and including every single work-related communication outside of my hours or requests for a small task that I need to complete on an off day as hours worked, and I have banked up some nice overtime. Last week, the employer sent an email saying that I am no longer allowed to work overtime, and every hour worked OT will be banked as vacation time instead. I don't want that because if I'm working OT, I deserve to be paid for it. So I immediately stopped responding to anything after hours or on off days and have been working only 8 hours on my scheduled days. The frustration and passive aggression coming from my employer since I did that is unmatched. Truly, they should get an award for the snarky and condescending emails and texts they have sent me. I only have a few days left and will be filing an ethics complaint for the many egregious things I have seen once I am out of there. It's what they deserve and I can't wait. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.